On a January evening in 1995, an 18-year-old woman became the youngest female ever sentenced to death in modern American history. Her name was Krista Pike, and her case would become emblematic of a rare and complex phenomenon in the U.S. justice system: young women facing capital punishment. Since 1976, when the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty, women have comprised only 2% of death row inmates, with even fewer entering the system before the age of 25. These cases, each unique in their circumstances, yet bound by common threads, reveal a particularly challenging aspect of America's ongoing relationship with capital punishment. Christina Walters, State of North Carolina. On August 17, 1998, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, 20-year-old Christina Walters led a gang initiation that would end in tragedy. As the leader of a local Crips gang set, Walters orchestrated what became known as a random test of loyalty shooting spree. Along with gang members Tamika Douglas and Ione Black, Walters drove around looking for victims. These are the gang members, as you can see. The group first encountered Deborah Cheeseborough, a 37-year-old manager at a local restaurant. They forced her into her car at gunpoint and drove to a remote location. There, Walters shot Cheeseborough multiple times and left her for dead. Miraculously, Cheeseborough survived despite being shot 7 times. Later that same night, the group came across 2 more women, Susan Moore, 21, and Tracy Lambert, 19. Following a similar pattern, they kidnapped both women. This time, as part of the gang initiation ritual, Walters ordered other gang members to shoot the victims. Both of these, Moore and Lambert, were killed execution style, each with a single shot to the head. Walters was arrested shortly after the crimes. During the investigation, it was revealed that the victims were chosen completely at random, selected only because they were white as part of the gang's initiation requirements. The surviving victim, Deborah Cheeseborough, provided crucial testimony during the trial. At her trial in 2000, prosecutors presented evidence of Walters' role as the mastermind of the killings. Despite her young age, the prosecution emphasized the calculated nature of the crimes and Walters' position of leadership in orchestrating the violence. After deliberation, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and various kidnapping charges. Christina Walters was sentenced to death, becoming one of the youngest women on North Carolina's death row at the age of 22. She remains incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women, where she continues to serve her sentence on death row. Tiffany Cole, State of Florida. This is the picture of Tiffany from the prison. On July 8, 2005, 23-year-old Tiffany Cole participated in one of Florida's most shocking crimes. Along with 3 male accomplices, Michael Jackson, Alan Wade, and Bruce Nixon, Cole orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of Carol and Reggie Sumner, an elderly couple who were both 61 years old. What made the crime particularly heinous was that Cole had known the victims. They had been her neighbors in South Carolina before moving to Jacksonville, Florida.
Testimony has ended today in the case against one of just 3 women on Florida's death row. Tiffany Cole was previously convicted of kidnapping Carol and Reggie Sumner from their Jacksonville home in July of 2005 and burying them alive.
Cole and her accomplices traveled from South Carolina to Florida, where they put into motion a calculated plan. They gained entry to the Sumners' home under the pretense of being interested in buying a car. Once inside, they forced the couple into the trunk of their own car. The group then drove across the state line to a pre-dug grave in Georgia, where both victims were buried alive. The investigation revealed that Cole had helped scout locations for the gravesite and had taken pictures of the group posing in front of the hole they had dug. After killing the couple, the perpetrators used their ATM cards and stole their money. When the bodies were discovered, investigators quickly connected Cole and her accomplices to the murders through ATM surveillance footage and phone records. Bruce Nixon, one of the co-defendants, confessed and cooperated with authorities, leading to the arrest of the other participants. During Cole's trial in 2007, prosecutors presented evidence of her intimate involvement in planning and executing the crimes. The jury heard testimony about how she had exploited her prior relationship with the victims to gain their trust. They also saw the disturbing photographs of Cole and her accomplices posing at the gravesite before the murders. The jury found Tiffany Cole guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death in 2008, becoming one of the youngest women on Florida's death row at age 26. You can see her wiping her tears after the hearing. She currently remains on death row at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. When asked about her last statement during the sentencing phase, Cole expressed remorse, saying, "I'm sorry for what happened. I take responsibility for my part in this crime." Brittany Holberg, State of Texas. On November 13, 1996, in Amarillo, Texas, 23-year-old Brittany Holberg committed a crime that would place her among the youngest women sentenced to death in the state's history. The victim was A.B. Towery Sr., an 80-year-old retired church worker who lived alone in his apartment.
One of the most heinous crimes someone could commit, killing a defenseless old man, Brittany Holberg. Killed an innocent, defenseless 80-year-old man.
Initially, Holberg claimed she had visited Towery's apartment to use his phone. However, the investigation revealed a different story. Evidence showed that Holberg, who was working as a prostitute at the time, had gone to Towery's apartment with the intention of robbery to fund her drug habit. The crime scene was particularly brutal. Towery was stabbed nearly 60 times with various weapons, including a butcher knife and a grapefruit knife. The final blow came when Holberg shoved a lamp pole 5 inches into his throat. After the murder, she stole Towery's wallet and credit cards, using them to purchase drugs before fleeing to Tennessee, where she was eventually arrested. During her trial in 1998, Holberg's defense team argued that she had acted in self-defense, claiming Towery had attacked her after a dispute over payment for sex. However, prosecutors presented evidence of the robbery motive and the excessive violence used in the crime. The jury took less than an hour to find her guilty. At the time of her sentencing, Holberg became one of the youngest women on Texas's death row at age 25. She remains incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, where female death row inmates are housed. Patricia Blackman, State of Alabama. In May 1999, 24-year-old Patricia Blackman committed a crime that shocked the city of Dothan, Alabama. The victim was her adopted 2-year-old daughter, Dominiqua Bryant. Emergency responders found the toddler unresponsive in Blackman's apartment after she called 911, reporting that her daughter wasn't breathing.
Patricia Blackman is on death row for capital murder in the death of her 28-month-old adopted daughter, Dominiqua Bryant. Blackman.
The medical examination revealed that Dominiqua had suffered severe trauma, including multiple skull fractures, broken bones, and internal injuries. The evidence suggested she had been thrown against a wall and stomped on. Investigators also found a bloody shoe print matching Blackman's size on the child's chest. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence of ongoing abuse. Testimony from medical experts indicated that Dominiqua had suffered previous injuries that had begun to heal. The prosecution also highlighted Blackman's history of aggressive behavior and previous incidents of child abuse. Blackman's defense attempted to argue that the child's injuries could have been accidental or caused by someone else who had access to the apartment. However, the physical evidence, particularly the shoe print and blood spatter patterns, strongly tied her to the crime. The jury found Blackman guilty of capital murder of a child under the age of 14. In 2002, at age 27, she was sentenced to death, becoming one of the youngest women on Alabama's death row. She continues to serve her sentence at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Amelia Carr, State of Florida. On February 14, 2009, in Marion County, Florida, 24-year-old Amelia Carr committed a crime that would make her one of the youngest women on Florida's death row. The victim was Heather Strong, a 26-year-old mother of two, who was also the estranged wife of Carr's boyfriend, Joshua Fulgham.
And now to new developments in a big local story that we've been following since 2005.
The prosecution presented evidence showing that Carr and Fulgham had carefully planned Strong's murder. They lured her to a storage trailer on Carr's family property under the pretense of signing paperwork related to the custody of Fulgham's children. Once inside, they bound Strong to a chair with duct tape. According to court records, Carr and Fulgham attempted to suffocate Strong with a plastic bag. When this failed, they resorted to more violent means. Strong was ultimately suffocated to death, and her body was buried in a shallow grave that had been prepared beforehand. The victim's remains were discovered several weeks later, after Fulgham confessed to law enforcement. During the trial in December 2010, prosecutors presented compelling evidence, including surveillance footage showing Carr and Fulgham purchasing supplies used in the murder. They also provided testimony from witnesses who said Carr had spoken about wanting Strong gone in the weeks leading up to the murder. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours before finding Carr guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. In February 2011, at age 26, she was sentenced to death, becoming the youngest woman on Florida's death row at that time. You can see her talking to her defense attorney before the sentence. Carr remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution. Kelly Renee Gissendanner, State of Georgia. Though not among the youngest when executed, Kelly Gissendanner's case began when she was just 28 years old. On February 7, 1997, Gissendanner orchestrated the murder of her husband, Douglas Gissendanner, convincing her boyfriend, Gregory Owen, to carry out the killing.
Anna Gissendanner has been executed in the state of Georgia in the United States. She became the first woman to be executed in the state for 70 years. Gissendanner was convicted of murder for persuading her lover to kill her husband in 1997.
The prosecution demonstrated that Gissendanner had meticulously planned her husband's murder. She provided Owen with details about Douglas's schedule and movements, gave him a knife and gloves, and even drove by the murder scene to ensure everything went according to plan. Owen forced Douglas to drive to a remote location where he was stabbed multiple times and left to die. Initially, both Gissendanner and Owen denied involvement in the murder. However, Owen eventually confessed and agreed to testify against Gissendanner in exchange for a life sentence. During the trial, prosecutors revealed that Gissendanner stood to benefit from 2 life insurance policies on her husband and had previously expressed wishes to see him dead. The jury found her guilty of malice murder, and she was sentenced to death in 1998. During her years on death row, Gissendanner underwent a significant personal transformation, earning a theology degree and becoming a spiritual advisor to other inmates. Many people, including Pope Francis, advocated for clemency based on her rehabilitation. Despite numerous appeals and requests for clemency, Gissendanner was executed by lethal injection on September 30, 2015, at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison. She became the first woman executed in Georgia in 70 years. For her last meal, she requested cornbread, buttermilk, 2 Burger King Whoppers with cheese, 2 large orders of fries, popcorn, salad with boiled eggs, tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, carrots, cheese, and Paul Newman buttermilk dressing and cherry vanilla ice cream. Her final words were directed to her attorney, addressing her children. "Tell the Gissendanner kids I went out singing Amazing Grace. And tell them I love them with all my heart. And tell them I love them and I'm so proud of them." She then proceeded to sing Amazing Grace as the lethal injection was administered. Krista Pike, State of Tennessee. On January 12, 1995, in Knoxville, Tennessee, 18-year-old Krista Pike committed a crime that would make her the youngest woman ever sentenced to death in the United States in the post-Furman era. The victim was Colleen Slemmer, a 19-year-old fellow student at the Job Corps training program. Pike, along with her boyfriend Tadarl Shipp and friend Shadala Peterson, lured Slemmer to an isolated area near the University of Tennessee campus. The prosecution's evidence showed that Pike had become convinced that Slemmer was trying to steal Shipp's affections, though investigators found no evidence to support this belief. What followed was a brutal attack that lasted for approximately 30 minutes. Pike and her accomplices tortured Slemmer, taunting her while beating her with pieces of asphalt and slashing her with a meat cleaver. The final blow came when Pike smashed Slemmer's skull with a large piece of asphalt. In a particularly disturbing detail that would later emerge at trial, Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a souvenir. During the investigation, Pike readily confessed to the murder, showing little remorse and even laughing while describing certain details of the crime. The medical examiner's testimony revealed that Slemmer had suffered approximately 200 separate wounds before her death. In March 1996, at age 19, Pike was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to death, becoming both the youngest woman ever sentenced to death in Tennessee and the youngest female death row inmate in the United States at that time. She remains on death row at the Tennessee Prison for Women. While in prison, Pike has been involved in additional violent incidents. In 2001, she attempted to strangle fellow female death row inmate Patricia Jones with a shoestring, though Jones survived the attack. This incident resulted in an additional 25-year sentence for attempted first-degree murder. Shipp received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years, while Peterson received probation in exchange for her testimony against Pike and Shipp. When asked during her sentencing if she had anything to say to Slemmer's family, Pike offered a brief apology. "I'm sorry I caused everyone so much pain. I was young and stupid, and I made a mistake."
It is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution in the mode prescribed by law, and that you shall be transferred to the custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison for Women. And further, on the 12th day of January 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock by a sufficient current of electricity. May God have mercy upon you. Mr. Bates, take Mr. Pike into the door.
Can I please have a mama?
You can see her here crying after being sentenced, but it was too late. Tierra Capri Gobble, State of Alabama. On December 15, 2004, 21-year-old Tierra Gobble committed a crime that would place her among the youngest women sentenced to death in Alabama. The victim was her 4-month-old son, Phoenix Jordan Parrish, who died from severe head trauma and other injuries. Medical evidence presented at trial showed that Phoenix had suffered multiple traumatic injuries, including skull fractures, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Experts testified that the injuries were consistent with repeated episodes of violent shaking and impact trauma. The prosecution demonstrated a pattern of abuse, presenting evidence that Phoenix had previously been treated for suspicious injuries. Witnesses testified about Gobble's history of aggressive behavior toward the infant, including incidents where she was seen shaking him and expressing frustration about his crying. The investigation revealed that she had searched online for information about baby shaking and head injuries in the days leading up to Phoenix's death. During the trial, Gobble's defense attempted to argue that the baby's injuries could have been caused by accidents or by other individuals who had access to him. However, medical experts testified that the severity and pattern of injuries were inconsistent with accidental trauma. The jury found Gobble guilty of capital murder of a child under the age of 14. In 2005, at age 22, she was sentenced to death, becoming one of the youngest women on Alabama's death row. She joined Patricia Blackman at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. Carla Faye Tucker, State of Texas.
On February 2, 1998, 38-year-old convicted murderer Carla Faye Tucker was removed from her 60-square-foot cell at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas.
While not among the youngest when sentenced, Carla Faye Tucker's case gained national attention, and her execution at age 38 made her the first woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Her crimes were committed when she was 23 years old, during a period of severe drug addiction. On June 13, 1983, Tucker and her boyfriend, Daniel Garrett, entered the apartment of Jerry Lynn Dean after a multiple-day drug binge. The original plan was to steal motorcycle parts, but the situation turned violent when Dean woke up. Using a pickaxe they had brought with them, Tucker and Garrett brutally murdered both Dean and Deborah Thornton, who was staying at Dean's apartment. This was the murder weapon used. The brutality of the crimes shocked even hardened investigators. Tucker would later confess that she experienced sexual pleasure with each swing of the pickaxe. This admission would haunt her later appeals, even after her dramatic religious conversion in prison. Following her arrest, Tucker underwent a profound transformation. She became a born-again Christian in prison and devoted herself to ministering to other inmates. Her case attracted worldwide attention, with many prominent figures, including Pope John Paul II, advocating for clemency based on her rehabilitation. Despite numerous appeals and petitions, Tucker was executed by lethal injection on February 3, 1998, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. For her last meal, she declined any special requests, eating only a banana, peach, and garden salad with ranch dressing. Her final words were filled with expressions of love and remorse. "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this. Baby, I love you. Ron, give Peggy a hug for me. Everybody has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Baggett, thank all of you so much. You have been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." Priscilla Ford, State of Nevada. On Thanksgiving Day, 1980, 51-year-old Priscilla Ford committed a crime that would make her one of the most notorious female defendants in Nevada history. Though not among the youngest sentenced to death, her case represents an important chapter in the history of women on death row.
Priscilla Ford is in a Nevada prison waiting to die in the gas chamber. She was convicted of murder after driving her car onto a Reno sidewalk in 1980, killing 6 people and injuring 23 others.
Ford deliberately drove her Lincoln Continental down a crowded sidewalk on Virginia Street in Reno, Nevada. She struck 27 pedestrians, killing 6 and injuring 23 others. Among those killed were 24-year-old Rena McCutcheon and her baby daughter. The incident became known as the Thanksgiving Day Massacre. During her trial, evidence emerged of Ford's history of mental illness and previous threats against the city of Reno. She had a documented history of paranoid schizophrenia and had made numerous complaints to local authorities about perceived persecution. Her defense team argued that she was not mentally competent to stand trial. However, prosecutors successfully demonstrated that Ford had acted with premeditation. They presented evidence that she had expressed intentions to destroy Reno and had carefully chosen the time and location to maximize casualties. Witnesses testified that she appeared to deliberately aim her car at groups of pedestrians. The jury rejected the insanity defense and found Ford guilty on all counts. In 1982, she was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman sentenced to death in Nevada since 1976. She remained on death row at the Nevada Women's Correctional Center until her death from natural causes in 2005, at the age of 75. Darlie Lynn Routier, State of Texas. On June 6, 1996, a crime occurred in Rowlett, Texas, that would place 26-year-old Darlie Routier among the youngest women sentenced to death in the state. The victims were her 2 young sons, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon.
Darlie Routier says that an intruder came in and stabbed the boys and then slashed her throat.
According to Routier's initial account, an intruder had broken into their home and attacked her and her children while they were sleeping in the family room. Her husband, Darren, and their youngest son, Drake, were sleeping upstairs and were unharmed. Routier suffered knife wounds to her throat and arm. while both Devon and Damon were fatally stabbed. However, investigators quickly became suspicious of Routier's story. The crime scene evidence appeared inconsistent with her account of an intruder attack. Key pieces of evidence included the intact window screen that was supposedly cut by the intruder, blood spatter patterns that contradicted her version of events, and surveillance footage from a nearby store showing her purchasing materials similar to those used in staging the crime scene. Perhaps most damaging to Routier's defense was video footage taken at her son's gravesite 8 days after their deaths. The footage showed her and family members celebrating what would have been Devon's 7th birthday by spraying silly string and acting jovially. While her supporters argue this was a celebration of her son's life as requested by family members, prosecutors used it to portray her as lacking appropriate grief. During her trial in January 1997, prosecutors argued that Routier had killed her sons due to financial stress and dissatisfaction with her life. The jury found her guilty of the murder of Damon. She was not tried for Devon's murder, though she was initially charged with both deaths. She was sentenced to death shortly after. Routier maintains her innocence to this day, and her case has become a subject of controversy and debate. Her advocates argue that important evidence was mishandled or not properly tested, and that her wounds were too severe to have been self-inflicted. She remains on death row at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Frances Elaine Newton, State of Texas. On April 7, 1987, 21-year-old Frances Newton committed a crime that would make her the first black woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. The victims were her husband, Adrian, 23, their son, Alton, 7, and their daughter, Farah, 21 months old. Newton had taken out $100,000 in life insurance policies on her husband and daughter just weeks before the murders. She claimed she had done so at her husband's request. On the night of the murders, she told investigators she had left the apartment to run errands and returned to find her family dead from gunshot wounds.
There are so many things that I don't know and I don't have answers to, but there are some things that I do know, and that I know that if a jury knew, that they would have come to a different decision. The issue with the ballistics and the gun, they would have found out that the shell casings found there didn't match the weapon that they're saying is the murder weapon. That still hasn't been brought up in any of the court hearings. And that's a major, that's something I didn't know, but that one of the attorneys working on the case now told me about. And those are like fingerprints. It's something that wasn't brought up in trial, and I think that the jury should have been able to hear that.
The prosecution presented evidence that Newton had purchased the murder weapon, a .25 caliber pistol, 3 weeks before the killings. The gun was later found at an abandoned house where Newton's cousin lived. Ballistics tests matched it to the bullets that killed her family. Additionally, investigators found gun residue on the dress Newton was wearing the night of the murders. During her trial, prosecutors argued that Newton's motive was financial gain from the insurance policies. They presented evidence of her difficult financial situation and troubled marriage. Newton maintained her innocence, claiming her husband was involved in drugs and may have been killed by dealers. Despite numerous appeals and claims of inadequate representation, Newton was executed by lethal injection on September 14, 2005, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. For her last meal, she declined any special requests and was served the standard prison meal of chicken, corn, green beans, and sliced bread. Her final words were, "I love my family. I'm going to be with Jesus. I love all of you. I will see you when you get there. I will talk to you sooner or later." She was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. Michelle Byram, State of Mississippi. While not among the youngest sentenced to death, Michelle Byram's case represents a significant example of a death sentence being overturned. In 1999, at age 42, She was convicted of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Edward Byram Sr., when she was 41. Despite her age at sentencing, her case highlights important aspects of capital punishment, appeals, and post-conviction relief. According to court records, Edward Byram Sr. was found shot to death in his home in Iuka, Mississippi, on June 4, 1999. Initially, investigators believe Michelle had hired Joey Gillis to kill her husband, with her son, Edward Byram Jr., acting as an intermediary.
For Newsy, I'm Candace Avilés. The state of Mississippi has moved to execute its first female death row prisoner in 70 years. Mississippi Attorney General Jim Hood requested earlier this week that Michelle Byram be executed by lethal injection. The state Supreme Court has the final say on executions, so if it confirms the date, Byram will be the first woman to be put to death in Mississippi since 1944.
Soon after this, she was convicted and sentenced to death in November 2000. However, crucial evidence emerged after her conviction. Multiple confessions from her son Edward Jr. indicated that he had actually committed the murder himself, not the alleged hired killer. Additionally, evidence of severe physical and sexual abuse by her husband, along with mental illness and brain damage from years of inhaling rat poison, had not been adequately presented at her original trial. In 2014, the Mississippi Supreme Court took the rare step of reversing her conviction and ordering a new trial. Rather than face another trial, Byram pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit capital murder and was sentenced to time served. She was released from prison in June 2015. The cases we've examined represent a small but significant portion of women sentenced to death in the United States. Since 1976, when the Supreme Court lifted the moratorium on capital punishment in Gregg v. Georgia, only 2% of death row inmates have been women. The number of young women sentenced to death has been even smaller. The majority of women sentenced to death were convicted of murders involving people close to them, family members, partners, or acquaintances. This differs from male death row inmates, who more often were convicted of killing strangers during other crimes. Mental health issues, histories of abuse, and trauma frequently appear in these cases. Many of the youngest women sentenced to death had experienced significant trauma or abuse before their crimes. The role of gender in capital cases remains complex. While women are far less likely than men to receive death sentences, those who do are often portrayed as having violated traditional gender roles, as mothers who killed their children, or women who acted with particular violence. As of now, there are approximately 50 women on death row in the United States. The exact number fluctuates due to appeals, commutations, and natural deaths. Women remain a small minority of death row inmates, representing about 2% of the total death row population. Several states have now abolished the death penalty entirely, and others have governor-imposed moratoriums. This has affected some of the cases we've discussed, with some inmates being sentenced to life imprisonment when their states abolished capital punishment. The execution of women remains relatively rare in the modern era. Since 1976, only 17 women have been executed in the United States, compared to over 1,500 men during the same period. If you like the way we create these videos, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives.